Kia ora, and rau rangatira mā, nau mai haere mai whakatau mai ki tēnei hui mariko. Ko Barry Coates aho, ko te kairahi o te putea whai whakaaro. Nā reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Good evening, everyone. I'm Barry Coates, founder and CEO of Mindful Money. A warm welcome to you all. This is the seventh in our second series of online seminars. I invite you to watch the previous seminars on different aspects of climate change with Rod Oram, James Shaw, Laura Clark and others. And we've had, this is now our third seminar in a row on impact investment. So please check out those videos on Mindful Money's website. Welcome to tonight's panel. During the discussion, sorry that we're not directly talking online, but please use the Q&A for questions, or you can put chat into the chat window, and feel free to introduce yourself to other people on the call. So tonight's seminar is part of our theme of impact investment. This is the sweet spot for many investors. You get a good financial return, and you get to create positive impacts for society and for the environment. Alongside tonight's panel, Mindful Money is actually launching two new initiatives today. We're launching an impact funds directory, and it's a directory of funds available both to wholesale investors and to retail investors. It's mainly, to be honest, wholesale investors at the moment because there are very few retail investment products available to the public. So for those of you who aren't sure about the distinction between wholesale and retail, there's information on the website that'll be put in the chat function. The other thing that we're launching is a campaign to demonstrate public demand for more impact funds. So when I said there aren't many funds available to members of the public, we want there to be more funds. And the way to do that is to get the major capital providers, the major funds, KiwiSaver funds, investment funds, to actually be putting more of their money into the impact end of the fund spectrum. So, on to the seminar. Tonight, our panel is going to be talking about good practice in impacting investing and how we can ramp up the sector for the future. Let me kick off by welcoming our first panel member. Roy Thompson is co-founder and director of Newground Capital. He's a real leader of Aotearoa's fledgling impact investment movement, including being founder of the Impact Enterprise Fund and the new fund, Homes for Tamariki. So a very warm welcome to you, Roy. Can you trace for us a little bit about the development of impact investment in New Zealand?
Sure. Thanks very much, Barry, and kia ora, everyone. Nice to be here this evening to share a few thoughts on impact investing. Yeah, I guess our journey started in 2014 when we established Newground as an impact investment firm. And in the subsequent 7 or so years, we've been focused particularly around three areas. We've been working on the development of better rental housing alternatives for renters across New Zealand, working with large institutional investors such as New Zealand Super Fund and iwi, including Ngāi Tahu. And that's starting to get some real traction in the market, which is pleasing. And then, as you mentioned, we launched in 2017 in partnership with Akina Foundation, the Impact Enterprise Fund, which is a fund that invests in social enterprises, so basically companies that have either a social or environmental mission at their heart. And that was a reasonably small fund. We weren't sure how much opportunity there was in the market really when we launched that in 2017 and started investing in 2018. We've looked at 583 different opportunities in the ensuing 4 years, and we've made 4 investments and closing in on the last sort of 2 or 3. And you know that fund actually has been quite successful. It had a 15% return target which is quite challenging to achieve over and above all the impact objectives that we want to see flow out of the fund. But I'm pleased to say that after nearly 4 years of investing, we've got an internal rate of return on that fund of somewhere close to 24%, and we're pretty happy with where we're at and what the future looks like for that fund. So we are planning a new fund next year, something like $50 million fund. And then also, as you mentioned, a fund that we're currently raising at the moment is called Homes for Tamariki, which is focused on providing better housing options, really, for some of New Zealand's most vulnerable children, getting them out of motels and into stable environments where they can try and get their lives back on track as best they can.
Thank you, Roy. There's lots of points there to pick up on. Let me start with the Impact Enterprise Fund. You've looked at 583 potential companies. That's a lot of companies to invest in for. What do you see as the kind of constraints on scaling up the impact investment sector? Is it that there aren't, from your perspective, enough investable propositions out there, or is part of the difficulty from your perspective is that you've had quite a high bar in terms of rate of return and expectations on both impact and return?
It's a really good question, and it's a difficult one to answer because it's a very complex answer, really. I mean, our chosen area, companies who are at either early stage or they're just really ramping up into their growth stage. So we don't do sort of seed very, very early, nor do we do later stage companies. So that's the first sort of screen, I guess. Then on the impact side, we're looking for businesses that can deliver an impact that is meaningful, measurable, and scalable. And if it's not all three of those, unfortunately, we can't invest. And the meaningful one is a really important thing, because there's lots of people out there doing lots of good things, for sure, well-intentioned and making a difference. But we're looking to invest in things that are turning the dial somehow, really making some change in some critical area. So that's an important area that we focus on to make sure that we really are helping to create impact outcomes from what we do. And then, of course, we're having to blend all of that with making sure that we don't lose investor money and that actually, ideally, we achieve our return targets. And so when you sort of put all that together, it's quite a challenge. That's the reason we've looked at so many different companies.
So for the audience, some of the audience may not be familiar with the kinds of companies that we're talking about. Could you just give a quick snapshot of one of the companies that you're invested in?
Sure, and I'll put a link on the notes later on to the website that contains information on the companies. But possibly Waikato is a good example. It was one of the earlier ones that we invested in. Waikato is based down in Nelson, and they recognise that New Zealand's got a growing problem with a noxious Untitled seaweed, which is sort of spreading around the country. Originally imported on ships from Japan by accident, I guess. So Waikato have developed a range of fertilizers, organic fertilizers, based on Untitled seaweed. So they harvest it actually out of the Marlborough Sounds and turn it into an organic fertilizer. So it's kind of a win-win. We're taking a noxious pest essentially out of our coastal waterways and turning it into something that's really effective for our organic and rapidly growing organic farming community.
Cool. Thank you. Great example. I must declare a slight conflict of interest insofar as I'm a tiny investor in the Impact Enterprise Fund, which I think is doing a great job. So congratulations on it. Let me introduce our second guest. Joe Kelly is joining us. Joe is CEO of Toitū Tahua, the Centre for Sustainable Finance, which, as many of you know, is a relatively new organisation that has come from the process called the Sustainable Finance Forum that prepared a roadmap towards sustainable finance, and as a result of that roadmap, a centre was formed, and Joe has been appointed CEO. So fantastic you're in this role, Joe. Joe's also a member of the National Advisory Board of the Impact Investing Network, and she's previously been involved in lots of different roles across impact investment, including authoring research for Philanthropy New Zealand. So Joe, very warm welcome. I'd be interested in your perspective of where we're up to on impact investment in Aotearoa.
Kia ora koutou. Hi Barry. I mean, where we're up to, I think it's very early days, and I think, as Roy said, it's a bit of a journey. So there's a well-established community, I would say, but I came home in 2015, having spent 10 years in New York and worked alongside some sort of early impact investors there, and I would put us, 5 to 8 years behind other regions in terms of the just general understanding of impact investment and the role that it can play in deploying capital essentially for more good and not just less bad.
Yeah.
Which is what we see with other parts of the capital continuum where people are really focused on how they do less bad through ESG or responsible investment. Yeah.
So at Mindful Money, we often kind of talk about that spectrum from avoiding things that are inconsistent with your values or cause harm, through to kind of engaging with companies and making them better, through to investing in things that really make a difference. Why do you think New Zealand is behind, particularly on that impact investment end of the spectrum?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I have to be careful in some ways with what I say, because one of the findings from the research that I did with Rangi Māori Prize for Philanthropy in New Zealand is that for Māori, they don't tend to view themselves as impact investors, but the concepts that are sort of part of impact investment are not new, right? And so in a way, we're quite far advanced, and in another way, we're really quite behind. I think it's a mindset thing. I think we have a great sort of startup and innovation mindset, but that hasn't yet evolved to include this notion of business as a force for good. And I think that really constrains probably some of the innovation in the purpose or the impact space that we might need to see.
So does that suggest that we're not generating enough companies that are demanding impact capital? So the problem is as much a supply problem as a provision of funds?
I think, well, from the research, what we heard from the front lines is that people are really confident that there is an ever increasing supply, and that's because people's values are changing. So the young people and people who are inclined to start companies these days, they want to do it for a purpose, and they want to have an impact or have to solve a problem. So there's general confidence that the supply of companies and ventures is growing, but it's still really hard. I mean, it's really hard to be a startup. It's really hard to be a purpose-driven startup, especially if your professional advisors and investors don't really understand what you're trying to do. And so I think there are some barriers to entrepreneurs and new ventures that we just need to chip away at and try to take down.
And just looking from your kind of role as CEO of Centre for Sustainable Finance, Tuitu Tahua, do you see the big end of town, the larger funds, the kind of the major investment capital providers, banks, big funds, etc. Do you see them as potentially being providers of capital into impact investment? How important do you see that movement of capital being from the large institutions into impact investment, or do you think there are going to be other mechanisms to provide capital for impact investment?
No, I think it's really important, and I think that people in every part of the capital continuum want to participate in using investment to solve social and environmental problems. So I think that there's room for everyone in this movement. And I definitely see, large pools of capital or institutional capital as part of the movement. It's not necessarily that way right now, and there are some things I think we need to overcome, like sort of alignment on what it means to be an impact investor, and alignment on what it means to do good, whose definition of good we're using, especially when we're talking about social impact. So in a way, climate, investing for climate outcomes is sort of helpful because it's not, I wouldn't say it's straightforward, but it's straightforward relative to some of the more complex sort of social or cultural types of investments that an impact investor might try to undertake.
Cool. Okay, well, let's come back to some of those points in a minute. I'll just bring in Rachel. So the third member of our panel is Rachel Brown. She's founder of the Sustainable Business Network, and she's played a critical role in advancing sustainable business in Aotearoa, New Zealand for almost 20 years. And I think Sustainable Business Network's on a real roll at the moment, as many of you may know from their work on the Climate Action Kit, on nature conservation, jobs for nature conservation, on the circular economy. So Rachel's been leading the organisation into new areas of work and really exciting areas of work.
Oh, kia ora, Barry. Nice.
Welcome, Rachel.
Yeah.
Cool. I should probably also say that I'm a board member of Sustainable Business Network, and I'm immensely proud to be, and I think you guys are doing a great job. It's probably obvious. Rachel, so in terms of your membership and your involvement in sustainable business, kind of, do you see a problem with not enough capital or not enough capital on the right terms being offered to SMEs, sustainable business, particularly those that are kind of following the kaupapa of Sustainable Business Network and delivering real solutions?
Barry, I've been watching this for over 20 years. So I've been, before SBN, I was running the Environmental Business Network, and there is no problem with wonderful innovation, and there's no problem in this country with purpose-thinking businesses. They're there. But there has been, all the way through my career, a real gap in that flow of investment that comes down to those great ideas. And it often comes, you can get these startups that just get stuck at that scale point. So, and there's no shortage of them. I've watched amazing businesses have to leave New Zealand and go offshore, and it's still happening so that they can get the investment. And then I meet people who do invest capital in businesses, and they just do not trust the impact investment space. So there's a real disconnect. They see the sustainability story as a do-good story, but not a profitable story. And that's still the case for people who are in the investment space. So, it's endlessly frustrating, but the movement's changing quickly. I mean, thanks to the work that you're doing, Barry, you and others, the conversation's really starting to shift, and we've got some great funds. One of the community finance won our awards this year, which is giving some profile to it. It's mainstream investors got behind that, and what was it, 70 million they raised? Fantastic.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Such a great story, wasn't it? So
feels
for
like
those,
a turning point.
Yeah. For those of you who want to go and look at a previous seminar two times ago, we had James Palmer from Community Finance on the online seminar, and he was talking about raising 71 million for community finance, and now they're going from a debt fund, which lends for community housing, through an equity fund, which will really help the sector scale up. And you've, of course, got great initiatives like Homes for Tamariki coming up from Roy's work. So, in some cases, there is that start of funds
And Barry, I do wonder if homes feels like an easier space for Kiwis. We've got used to investing in houses. When you listen to Chris Luxon come on, he was talking about the fact that he's got, invested in houses as part of his portfolio. But I think that's a classic thing that we do here. We feel a lot more comfortable with investing in homes. And and the social homes are great, really needed, but how do we start to get more confidence in investing some of those new ideas? And I look at Rowan's climate VC fund, which I think is brilliant and really needed. And we've got to get these things scaled up. But one of the challenges is getting the feedstock to those funds. How do we help the SMEs that are doing these things well meet these funds so that they're doing the right kind of impact measurement, they're able to report back well, so that they're actually easily part of these pipeline and choices into these funds? Because I think at the moment there's kind of a gap in both ends of the supply and demand curve.
It may well be that, and we can sort of follow up on this, but it may well be that it's easier for investors to invest in physical assets and bricks and mortar where you've got asset backing for the company, as opposed to your reference to the Climate Venture Capital Fund. I think Rowan McMahon's on the call tonight. Hi, Rowan. But it's a little bit harder for people to understand climate solutions because it's a different kind of investment.
Yeah, and over the years, Barry, I just wanted to add that, we've been seeing for 20 years these wonderful ideas emerge, but until we get the financial levers in play, so whether it's procurement or investment, it just stays at a different level. So we need this to crank up because these things are urgent. Climate, biodiversity, inequality, all these things are urgent now. Regenerating nature, we have to scale it up faster. So we have to get smarter at getting those investments more attractive on both sides.
Cool. Let's bring our panelists back. So you guys want to turn on your videos and join in. Roy, can you continue this conversation around sorry, I suddenly sound very loud. Okay, that's better. Roy, can you continue this conversation around the issue of the problem being a kind of investing in new businesses, which may be a different model than housing. Obviously, kind of you're particularly involved in through Homes for Tamariki and housing at the moment. But is there a difference between impact investing for housing and other sectors?
I think there is, but I think fundamentally you've got a significant problem with both housing where it's indirect through a fund and investment in smaller companies, social enterprises, etc., which is liquidity. And in New Zealand today, our institutional investors particularly don't like taking liquidity risk. And it sounds all very boring and dry, but basically they always want to be able to see how they can run to the exit at a moment's notice. And it holds back a lot of investment into private assets that would ordinarily happen and does ordinarily happen in other big markets like Australia or North America or Europe. So we have a very small private asset market here. And I think, a crying shame in our country today is that, we've built this fantastic KiwiSaver scheme, which is just going from strength to strength, fantastic. But unfortunately, the way that we've designed it and the rules that we maintain around it mean that more than 50%, and I think now probably significantly more than 50% of all the money being saved into KiwiSaver is immediately going offshore. And, there's some relatively simple tweaks that could be made around KiwiSaver rules to allow and, in fact, encourage KiwiSaver managers to be a bit more adventurous in how they invest in the market, which would open up opportunities for much greater investment into the sort of sectors that we're talking about here tonight, whether it's bricks and mortar housing or it's young companies doing great things.
Right, because I think one of the issues is not only that half the money goes overseas, but as you say, very little of the money goes on things that aren't listed shares. So
Right.
the liquidity issue is there even for KiwiSaver, which is quintessentially long-term investing. So most people have their KiwiSaver funds in there for a very long time until they buy a house and then until they retire. And you would expect that to lead to a situation where you could be investing in assets which are not so liquid, that you don't have to kind of have a call on all of your funds at a few days' notice. So yeah, and it doesn't. We have discussed this on the program previously, and I think what we're starting to see is a bit of a change in that, and some funds are now saying they can put in, starting with kind of 1 or 2%, as is happening now, increase maybe to 5%. Some are even saying, well, maybe 10% is reasonable. And if we're looking at $90 billion in KiwiSaver funds, then actually that's a very, very significant growth to capital available for the private markets. Absolutely. And for impact investing. Joe, how does this look from the Centre for Sustainable Finance, and do you see this as being a kind of one of the key issues that is coming up? I know that the roadmap, for example, said mobilizing finance for climate change and for other sustainability uses is kind of one of the key issues.
The KiwiSaver illiquidity requirements is in the roadmap as one of the issues. I think that's one. There's some other issues as well around, we talk a lot at the centre around data and access to data, good data for decision making. At the moment, there's a lot of focus on climate, but obviously that's sort of a transcendent issue, and especially if we understand that measurement or understanding impact is a core sort of component of impact investing, then the ability to do that is really dependent on your ability to have good information, right, about what's going on. So there are some issues there, and as I mentioned before, that sort of supportive ecosystem around the ventures. We hear a lot about investment readiness. And actually, in my time at Deloitte, what occurred to me was there's also investor readiness, right? Because you can't rely on the businesses or the ventures or the entrepreneurs to, they shouldn't have to be the ones to explain this. So there's definitely some work to be done in our investment community about understanding that there are other things to look for in a business now that are beneficial or value creation that aren't the same things that we've been used to looking for in the past.
So Rachel, for you, how does this look in terms of what you're hearing back from SMEs? Are they getting frustrated by New Zealand being behind other countries on these issues? I mean, Joe referred to us being 6 to 8 years behind.
Yeah, Barry, the unfortunate thing that I see is and still seeing it, is businesses moving offshore. So we've just lost another dear company to America who just couldn't get the scale of investment they need here, a really progressive company using technology to solve some of those climate issues. They've now gone offshore. So it's still happening, but at the same time, I think we haven't really supported SMEs to be good with providing the data they need and good with understanding how you actually measure and describe the purpose-led work that they're leading. We haven't really, and I take that on as an organisation. We've only just started learning that in the last few years. SBN ourselves did our first impact report last year. We've done various versions of it, and we're slowly getting better, but it's pretty new here. We don't really have a rule book for it, which makes it hard for doing that matching. But Joe, I think you're absolutely right. When I listen to investors talking about sustainability, they still don't know it. they're not comfortable, they're not going to make it easy, they can't spot the opportunity, and they do tend to be older people. Like if this was a generation younger, you might find that they can see the opportunity quicker.
I think as well, one of the challenges is that, you know, these businesses they're not out there calling themselves impact businesses, right? So a lot of businesses that are making change in the world are just trying to have a business. They're not self-identifying as impact. They're certainly not looking for impact investment, right? And so we sort of are almost not able to see them because they're not showing up. Like they're not showing up for the impact investment readiness program because they don't see themselves as anything but entrepreneurs who have a purpose. So there's just I think there's a need to sort of extend how we think about impact investment and how we talk about it, so that in a way, so it's more inclusive for people who just want to do good business.
Yeah.
I guess can I just add to that though, because there are plenty of wonderful climate or circular businesses out there that we know, and more regenerative businesses emerging now who would love investment. They wouldn't talk about impact investment. You're right, Joe, but they desperately want investment. Some of them have got really good scale dreams. They want to become quite significant in the world of business, but shit, it's hard in New Zealand. The infrastructure's not there. There isn't a nice system that gets them from, they've made it out of their good ideas into a small successful business, and they just want to accelerate. And that's the really hard piece that I see here.
Yeah, so we often get questions from people saying, where can I invest in impact funds? In particular, we mainly deal in funds rather than individual companies. And it's one of the reasons we started this impact directory. So we put it in the chat, but it's just a way to kind of help make that connection to tell people what's available, because we're always getting people coming to us saying, yeah, interested in this impact investment thing. What's available? Where do I go? So, Roy, do you think that the impact investment sector itself should be taking on more responsibility to blow its own trumpet, or is a better way of putting this, to educate the public and highlight what the impact sector is doing?
Yeah, I guess probably yes and no. Yes, we have to be part of the education process, and I think we are, and what you're doing here tonight, Barry, is obviously part of that, and that's good. If I think back to when we were doing the roadshow for the Impact Enterprise Fund in 2017, that was hard work. That was starting from scratch. No one really knew what we were talking about. And I think, Deborah, you mentioned the do-gooder thing before. That's exactly what people were thinking, a bunch of do-gooders. Now, when we're raising the Homes for Tamariki Fund, it's a lot easier. Most investors that we're talking about, pretty much everybody's aware of impact investing as a sector, if you like, and probably more people than less have got a strategy in place. Nevertheless, there's still some disappointments happening, and I would say, without wanting to throw anybody under the bus, we've probably had a good handful of investors not wanted to invest in, or choose not to invest in that fund, not because they didn't like the fund or the impact outcomes, but they were worried about reputational risk of being sort of associated with that area, which is for some people, a bit icky. And I think that is pretty disappointing, if I can say that. Yeah, it's pretty sad because, and what I've sort of said to people is, look, actually, you can have all sorts of views, but at the end of the day, with these types of issues, we're either part of the solution or we're part of the problem. And sometimes you've just got to dig in and get your hands dirty and be part of the solution.
We do often hear this, Roy, it's almost like a macho thing to say, where we don't really believe in that environmental and social stuff. It's really about the finance. It's about the money. And that still characterizes much of the financial industry. Although I think the thing that's changed it more than anything else is when people have realized that social and environmental stuff is very, very good for financial return. And then suddenly people tend to sit up and wake up. We've had a question in, and Joe, I'm going to ask you to kick off on this one. The question, thanks, Sarah. Are there a set of common impact measures that investors are looking for across the board, or if not, should there be, so that everyone is talking the same language?
Thanks so much for asking me that question, Barry. It's my favourite thing ever to think about. It depends where you're at in terms of what type of investment you want to be doing. There are emerging sort of standards and definitions that investors are using. A lot of them are emerging out of the EU with something called an EU taxonomy, and that really looks at how investors can agree on what green is and to some degree what green isn't, but it's quite focused on green, doesn't really deal too much with social and not at all with cultural. And so then when you come closer to the impact end of the continuum, there are conventions, there's ways of thinking about understanding impact, but as yet there are some kind of global databases of metrics like IRIS and other places where you can look to identify metrics that may be suitable for your situation. But generally speaking, what this global convention, the Impact Management Project, which is the one most people use, asks us to do is try to understand the experience of people who are being impacted. And that's what's sort of standard, that's the principle that everybody can align on. And there's a tremendous amount of work in Aotearoa to achieve that. And so I think, through the centre, we're looking at creating some common understanding around the conventions that we want to use and ways that we can go about identifying meaningful metrics in different scenarios with different communities. And then sort of at the other end of things, the External Reporting Board is also looking at different metrics obviously for climate disclosures and methodologies for that, but also for integrated reporting. So eventually, hopefully, everything will converge and we'll be able to agree on at least some commonly needed, commonly used and highly needed metrics.
And Roy, I know that you've been working with some of those measures in the INP framework and at the Impact Enterprise Fund. Can you describe a little bit how it has looked from the perspective of using those measures in order to assess propositions or proposals to you?
You're on mute.
You're mute.
Roy.
You can't hear me?
No, good now.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I mean, this is always a tricky area for sure. It's never easy to accurately measure and report impact outcomes, but we do our best. I mean, we use the Impact Management Project framework to guide us in what we do. I have put on a link in response to the question to our latest impact report, which goes into quite some detail around these particular issues. But it is I think not only in New Zealand but globally, this particular part of impact investing is continuing to evolve quite quickly, obviously, and will continue to do so, I'm sure.
You're on mute, Barry.
Can you hear me now? Rachel, I heard you make a call for perhaps more exposure to SMEs to be aware of what investors are looking for in terms of impact measures and being able to collect and present the data, which would translate into the investor's language. Is that something that you think SBN might be involved in the future?
I think it's something we should be involved in. Absolutely. We are. It's fair to say we're on a learning journey. One of the things that's really tricky about any of this stuff is that in New Zealand, our SMEs are tiny. So when you talk about impact metrics for SMEs overseas, whether it's climate, nature, whatever it might be, they're actually talking about medium to large size firms and the expectations of medium to large size firms. We don't have that scale here. Our businesses are really small. So I guess the challenge for us is how do we make this accessible to overstretched, under-resourced organisations so that they don't spend all of their time fretting about this stuff? How do we make it as easy as we can so they can be successful? Because they're doing their good mahi. We need to help them do it, get these metrics right so they can get to scale without overloading. And I think I really appreciate Mike Taitoko's work with Toha. I don't know if you know them, but they're working out some metrics and data sovereignty. I totally agree with what we have to also help companies get, don't lose your data. People can extract data from you, and some systems are doing this already. We want to make sure that if data is being collected, that the data is being held with the organisation so that they can reuse it in whatever systems that we can help them build so that they can be faster at giving the data out to different custom bases. But,
we had Natalie Whitaker from Toha Foundry on last week, and she was great. So on exactly that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I'm going to wrap up in a minute, but just kind of a last question to you all. So, usual thing, fast forward a few years, what does all this look like? What's your kind of vision for an impact sector which is kind of perhaps your vision of what it can be in 5 years' time? Roy, do you want to kick off?
Well, I think I'd certainly like to hope that it's broadly accepted by institutional investors as a valid asset class for them. I mean, it shouldn't be exclusively for institutional investors, obviously. It should be spanning the whole gamut of different investors in the country. But I think if we really want to help some of these, SMEs achieve their full potential, we do need the kind of capital that only institutions control. And it's such a shame to see, these companies having to go overseas for capital when we have the capital here. We just haven't got an efficient method of channeling it to them really today.
Yeah. Joe?
I think for me, I really believe that we're in sort of a transition phase where we're re-understanding the purpose of money, right? We're re-understanding the purpose of investment, of business. And so I think depending on how far forward we might want to look, hopefully there's a point in time where impact investment doesn't exist anymore because all investment is done with a beneficial outcome in mind, right? So the full spectrum of all the instruments and money available to us is redirected into things that help the environment, help people. And I personally have no issue with people making a whole lot of money on the way. I think that's fine. But I do think that we sort of always refer to like the big and the small end of town. And I think that they're coming together because people in both places really, really care, and so increasingly will use what's available to them to make a difference. And so in my version of impact investment, I suppose it doesn't matter anymore because it's all the same thing.
I love that, Joe.
Nice vision, Joe.
Aspirational, I know.
No, it's just the way it's got to be. I completely agree with you. Let's do that. I guess it's how, for me, Barry, I'm assuming you're going to ask me, so I'm just going to jump in. For me, it's about making it so easy for people to do it so that it normalize it as quickly as we can. Because doing the right thing by people on the planet is just the way that we have to do everything now. The way that we procure things, we've got to be thinking about people on the planet for everything we buy and for everything we invest in. It's just a no-brainer, Barry. But we need to just build confidence, build some systems around it, make it easier for the good people to get the funding they need to do their mahi at scale. And I think let's do that in 5 years. We can. We're a small country. We know all the people we need to talk to. We just have to be a bit bolshy.
So,
before we close, one of the things that really came through in the research that we did, and Barry was one of the people we interviewed amongst a number of others who have been chipping away at this for a long time, was it's not up to us to teach you investors how to do this. If you want to know how to do it, you just get out there and do some deals. Just give it a try. Just sort of start moving forward, and it's not going to be perfect, but it also doesn't have to be huge right out of the gate. It's just about trying.
So let me just finish with a call to action for people. So for Mindful Money, while Roy's kind of correct in saying we need institutional money into impact investing, I always think that retail investors are often the kind of leverage for change, because when people shift, the institutions will shift as well. And I think we're seeing that on some of the ethical and responsible investing in New Zealand. So we're starting a campaign to call on people to use their voice to ask for more impact investment. And there are two aspects. One is for KiwiSaver funds to put more of their funds into impact investment, and the other is for dedicated impact investment funds. And we'd love to see people sign up to this, because what we so often hear back from the fund managers is, oh yeah, we'd like to do this, but we don't think there's a market out there. We don't think there's enough demand for these impact products. And I think this is the kind of way that we can get the public to express the market demand and say, when there are the funds available, yes, people will invest in them. So
Barry, can I add one more thing to that though?
Yeah.
I remember doing research years ago, and most people copy other people.
Yeah.
A lot of us are copiers. So what we need to do is showcase the folks that are investing and doing okay and enjoying the investments that they're making, and talk about them more, because we actually tend to just copy each other. And the more those table conversations start to happen, the better that's going to be in terms of human behavior and changing some of that dialogue. I think, if we're investing in this way, and, I've started to do it and I feel great about it, and I don't want to risk my money, but I'm going to put it in the place that makes a difference for my kids. And that's what I'm going to do. And I think we should all just be talking about it more.
And we're all walking examples. Thank you all very much. That was a great panel. You've been fantastic. So thank you so much, Joe and Rachel and Roy. That was great. For our audience, we are going to take a break. We are not. We're going to have a Christmas holiday and sometime in the new year, and we'll be back online in January. So thank you very much for supporting in the past 7 seminars. Go and have a look at those videos if you missed some of them. So thanks to the audience. Thanks also to sponsors. We've had sponsorship from AMP, Booster, Generate KiwiSaver, and Harbour Asset Management. So thank you very much to those sponsors. And we look forward to you joining us in the new year, where we're going to talk about a variety of issues, including more on climate change. We'll do more seminars on impact investment. We're going to be talking about some of the difficult issues like tackling modern slavery. We're going to talk about what kind of rules do we need on investment. We're going to talk about investing with a Te Ao Māori perspective and investing from a gender perspective. So lots to come in this seminar series. Look forward to seeing you again in the new year. Thank you all very much. Thanks particularly to our panel tonight. Ka kite
Thank you, Barry.
Thank you, Barry.
Thank you.